The woman was 9.5 months pregnant, and her face was covered in dark spots. The beauty-conscious woman couldn't bear her ugly appearance. She kept wiping her face, but no matter what she did, she couldn't get rid of them, so she shifted her attention to her belly. Fong Nua's emotions were very complicated. She felt like crying and laughing at the same time. Like all expectant mothers, she tidied up a drawer full of baby items, waiting for her husband to come home on time. However, Xiao Lu was out secretly treating himself to a late-night snack. He brought home 2 bowls of plain noodles without any seasoning. He reassured Fong Nua that he hadn't added anything either. Fong Nua found the food tasteless. At that moment, she noticed her husband hadn't taken a single bite. Xiao Lu told a kind-hearted lie, claiming he hadn't eaten any. He then symbolically took 2 bites. Then he helped Fong Nua to the sofa and massaged her legs, and reassured the baby not to kick her mother's belly. Soon, Xiao Lu went to the kitchen to peel an apple for Fong Nua. When he returned, he found her already asleep. He turned off all the lights in the house and stayed with Fong Nua on the sofa for the rest of the night. The next morning, when Fong Nua woke up, she saw the note Xiao Lu had left. He had already gone out to work. In fact, Xiao Lu was already overwhelmed by the burdens of life. Even though he was a leader, he had to personally go to the scene to perform a lion dance. However, Fong Nua had it even harder as a senior high school homeroom teacher. She had to teach while pregnant. However, during class, her water broke. She immediately called her husband. Upon hearing the news, Xiao Lu immediately put down his work and rushed to the hospital. Fong Nua asked the students to review their textbooks while she went to give birth. Xiao Lu stayed by his wife's bedside, quietly waiting for the arrival of their new life. Since her water had broken, she had to stay in that position. Fong Nua dared not move a muscle, afraid that something might go wrong. At that moment, Xiao Lu received a call from a colleague. There was still work to be done at the company. Fong Nua, being a considerate person, told him to go finish his work. Xiao Lu only hesitated for 2 seconds before deciding to go home to get his computer, leaving Fong Nua alone in the hospital room. Fong Nua never expected her husband to actually leave. Her mother was also shocked by Xiao Lu's behavior. Upon returning home, Xiao Lu didn't look for his computer or start working. Instead, he took out a can of beer, turned on the TV, and started watching a soccer match. He completely forgot that his wife was still in the hospital giving birth. He didn't even answer his mother-in-law's call. Just then, Fong Nua's stomach suddenly began to ache intensely. She was scared and said she didn't want to give birth naturally, but a cesarean section would require waiting in line. After some internal struggle, Fong Nua ultimately chose to give birth naturally. The nurse gave her a disapproving look and left. Fong Nua never imagined that Xiao Lu was drunk at home at that moment. He was woken up by his mother-in-law's call and drove to the hospital in a daze. On the way, he received a call from his mother. She reminded him not to forget to ask the doctor for the placenta. She wanted to give it to her younger son to strengthen his body. Xiao Lu swore he wouldn't let his mother get her way. Just as Fong Nua was having a difficult delivery, he finally arrived at the hospital. As a man, Xiao Lu had no idea what his wife had gone through. That was the most excruciating pain one could endure. Fortunately, the baby was born safely. After the nurse came out, Xiao Lu didn't care about his wife's condition at all. He immediately demanded the placenta from the nurse. The nurse handed it to him and told him to wait outside for a moment. She then returned to the delivery room and pushed Fong Nua out. But she couldn't find Xiao Lu anywhere. The nurse had no choice but to push Fong Nua into the ward. Xiao Lu had indeed gone to deliver the placenta. He had just sworn that he would not let his mother get her wish. It must be said that this kind of man is truly disgusting. Xiao Lu then returned to the delivery room to inquire about Fong Nua's condition. The nurse said there was no such person here. At that moment, Xia Hua and Lei Wen came to the hospital to visit. However, upon arriving at the ward, they found that Fong Nua was being cared for by her parents. As her husband, Xiao Lu was nowhere to be seen. It turned out that Xiao Lu had been waiting at the door of the delivery room the whole time, completely unaware of where Fong Nua was. Upon hearing the news, Xiao Lu rushed to the ward. However, he found the smell there repulsive. Fong Nua, upon hearing this, became emotionally overwhelmed and immediately kicked them out. It turned out that women may experience incontinence after giving birth. Xiao Lu still felt it was better for him to go back. After all, she was his wife. Fong Nua told him to leave immediately and not pretend to be a good person. Just moments ago, she had hoped so much that her husband would be by her side. At this moment, no matter how unwilling she was, it was Xiao Lu who had to help her clean up the remaining fluids. Just then, the nurse pushed the baby into the room. Everyone was captivated by the little bundle of joy. No one noticed that the one who truly needed care at that moment was Feng Nuo, who had just given birth. In the end, it was her mother who noticed the weak Feng Nuo wanting to drink water. A mother's love for her daughter is always the deepest. Xiao Lu hid at the door of the ward and disinfected himself thoroughly, though he claimed not to mind. He despised her to the core and was constantly trying to convince himself otherwise. Only after finishing did he finally enter the ward and gaze happily at his child. Under everyone's guidance, he carefully picked up Lucy, staring at his wife, who had just given birth. Xiao Lu felt utterly disinterested and looked at her with disgust. In his eyes, Feng Nuo was nothing more than a tool for giving birth. But no one could see into Xiao Lu's heart. Everyone sent them home. The mother-in-law immediately noticed the beer on the table. She first took Lucy to the bedroom and found it in complete disarray with no place to put anything. At that moment, Feng Nuo also noticed the mess on the table. Xiao Lu hurriedly explained that she had left in a hurry that morning and hadn't had time to clean up. The mother-in-law hinted that she shouldn't get angry with her daughter-in-law who had just given birth, especially now that her wounds hadn't healed yet. The hygiene at home must be kept in order. Xiao Lu gave a half-hearted response, saying that the postpartum nurse would arrive tomorrow. But his mother wasn't pleased to hear this. No matter how good the postpartum nurse is, she can't compare to family, and the fees are quite high. With that money, it would be better to use it for herself and have her take care of Feng Nuo. Xiao Lu hurriedly explained to his mother that he was afraid she would get tired, which is why he didn't do it. His mother retorted, "An old sow giving birth to a dozen piglets isn't tiring at all." Feng Nuo's mother heard this and was so angry she couldn't say a word. That night, the baby cried non-stop, and Feng Nuo wanted Xiao Lu to help. But Xiao Lu was sleeping like a log and couldn't be woken up. The baby kept crying non-stop, leaving the new mother at a loss. All the pain she had to endure alone. Fortunately, the postpartum nurse arrived the next day. Since the postpartum nurse arrived, Feng Nuo finally felt a lot more relaxed. In the middle of the night, while Feng Nuo was breastfeeding the baby, Lin Zi thoughtfully prepared a scarf to protect her privacy. This made Feng Nuo feel deeply moved. As soon as Lin Zi left, Feng Nuo felt thirsty and wanted to switch with Xiao Lu, but he was sleeping too soundly to respond. At that moment, Lin Zi handed her a glass of water, and Feng Nuo couldn't hold back her tears. She never expected that the person she shared a bed with couldn't be relied on in a critical moment. A few days later, her mother couldn't stop worrying about her daughter and asked about the nanny. She also reminded Feng Nuo that there had been reports online about nannies giving babies sleeping pills to make them sleep, and not to trust her too much, but to keep a close eye on her. Feng Nuo superficially said her mother was being overly sensitive, but from then on, she often observed secretly. However, before long, problems arose. Feng Nuo gradually noticed that the nanny was becoming increasingly lazy. Not only did she often leave without saying a word during the day, but she also slept soundly at night. The next day, Feng Nuo noticed that the baby's face was becoming increasingly yellow. Feng Nuo worriedly asked Lin Zi if they should take the baby to the hospital. Lin Zi remained calm, saying it was all normal and not to worry. She claimed she had cared for dozens of children and that the baby just needed to eat more and eliminate more. Feng Nuo thought she was a professional and didn't think much of it. That night, Feng Nuo noticed that the times and frequencies of Lin Zi's feedings didn't match up. She quickly woke Xiao Lu. Xiao Lu thought Lin Zi wouldn't make such a basic mistake and went back to sleep. Feng Nuo, feeling uneasy, quietly got up to check. She found Lin Zi secretly washing something in the kitchen. After Lin Zi returned to the room, she picked up the bottle and smelled it. Discovering the scent of formula, Feng Nuo finally realized that Lin Zi had secretly fed the baby formula to get more sleep. She immediately vented her frustration at the postpartum nurse. Lin Zi refused to admit what she had done. Feng Nuo was completely speechless. She had hired the nanny to help her with the heavy burden of taking care of the baby. Now she had to constantly watch the nanny. This drove Feng Nuo crazy. Feng Nuo wanted to fire the nanny, but since it was hard to find a replacement, she decided to have Lin Zi sleep with her instead. She thought things would improve. But the next day, another problem arose. The baby's jaundice was getting worse, but Lindsay glanced at the baby and calmly said it was nothing. Some babies recover quickly, while others take longer. As long as the baby is in good spirits, eating and sleeping well, there's nothing to worry about. Look at how miserable she is, how can she be in good spirits? But Fang Nuo wasn't reassured and insisted on calling Xiaolu back to take the baby to the hospital for a checkup. However, the test results showed that the baby's total bilirubin levels were too high, and immediate hospitalization for blue light therapy was necessary. Lindsay was terrified, blaming herself for her lack of professional knowledge, which had led to this situation. She had promised so firmly that everything would be fine. Just as she was worrying about how to explain this to Fang Nuo, the nurse's words reminded her. Xiaolu returned home and said the baby was fine and it was normal to stay in the hospital for a few days. As the saying goes, a child is a mother's flesh and blood. Whoever gives birth to them feels the pain. At that moment, Fang Nuo couldn't wait to finish her postpartum recovery. She packed her things and rushed to the hospital. Upon seeing her daughter lying alone in the blue light incubator, she burst into tears. At that moment, Lindsay pulled Xiaolu aside and quietly told her that the nurses weren't allowing breastfeeding. The child had developed breast milk jaundice. She had already suggested switching to formula earlier, but Fang Nuo refused to listen. Unaware of this, Xiaolu trusted Lindsay implicitly. She instructed Lindsay not to mention it yet, fearing Fang Nuo would be unable to handle the news that the jaundice was caused by breastfeeding. Upon returning home, Fang Nuo began to blame the postpartum nurse. She had insisted they should have come to the hospital earlier. Lindsay felt wronged, believing the jaundice wasn't entirely her fault. Xiaolu, witnessing the argument, quickly intervened to smooth things over. The high jaundice levels could be caused by breastfeeding. Fang Nuo immediately became upset upon hearing this. She confronted her husband, accusing him of questioning the quality of her breast milk. Fang Nuo was so angry that she slammed the door and stormed out. The tension between the couple began to escalate from that moment on. That day, Xiaolu's mother was watching others play mahjong. She carelessly left her premature granddaughter unattended nearby. Little did she know that the moment she let go, the stroller slid down the slope. Lu San noticed and was so scared he wet his pants. However, this scene was witnessed by Fang Nuo. She rushed over to comfort her daughter and tell her not to cry. Lu San was terrified by what he saw. Furious, Fang Nuo hugged the child tightly and rushed to the hospital. Xiaolu, upon hearing the news, also rushed to the hospital. Fortunately, the child was unharmed. Such a careless grandmother taking care of a child. The nanny, fearing Fang Nuo would hold her accountable, secretly fled the next day. Since the nanny left, Fang Nuo has had to take on all the household responsibilities. In the middle of the night, the baby cried uncontrollably, while her husband slept soundly. Fang Nuo was exhausted both mentally and physically. Since she couldn't find a nanny temporarily, Xiaolu had to call her mother to take care of the child. Little did they know that after the unreliable nanny left, an equally troublesome mother-in-law arrived. However, after this incident, Fang Nuo dared not let her mother-in-law take care of the child anymore. Lu San knew she had done something wrong and kept cleaning the house. She mopped the floor over and over again until it was spotless. At that moment, Fang Nuo's mother found out about the baby being dropped. She came straight to Lu San's house and had a big argument with her. Lu San felt wronged. She thought she had already admitted her mistake and apologized. After all, the baby had been dropped, and she felt bad too. Fang Nuo's mother didn't give her son-in-law any face. Lu San felt she had already done enough. Why wouldn't Fang Nuo's mother forgive her? She kept harping on it. Fang Nuo's mother thought Lu San was being unreasonable and not taking responsibility, leaving her son to handle the matter. Xiaolu was caught in the middle, unsure of what to say. Fang Nuo's mother felt sorry for her daughter. In a fit of anger, she decided to retire early and take care of the child herself, then slammed the door and left. In the end, the one who felt the most hurt was Fang Nuo. As a man, Xiaolu had to consider everyone's feelings. That night, after comforting Fang Nuo, he persuaded his mother to go home and rest for a while. However, Lu San refused, insisting that she couldn't just leave like that. The neighbors and her mahjong friends all knew she was taking care of the child. She felt humiliated to be driven away like this. Xiaolu couldn't bear to see his mother, who had given birth to and raised him, leave. He could only hope that Fong Nuo would understand his mother and let her stay. Fong Nuo felt helpless but didn't say anything. The next morning, Fong Nuo's mother arrived with her luggage. As soon as she entered the door, she saw Lu San still there. Lu San, desperate to see her granddaughter every day, publicly apologized to her daughter-in-law. Fong Nuo reluctantly agreed to let her mother-in-law stay. From then on, the two elderly women took care of Fong Nuo during her postpartum period. However, this was also the beginning of the conflict. After the fall incident, Fong Nuo no longer trusted her mother-in-law to take care of the child. She only allowed her to cook and clean. Fong Nuo's mother, on the other hand, was responsible for taking care of her daughter and granddaughter. Lu San, having made a mistake, naturally couldn't argue. Thus, the two divided their responsibilities clearly and did not interfere with each other. Fong Nuo's mother was meticulous and strict in her work. Every week, she would make a list of the ingredients needed for the next week's meals and give it to Lu San, who would only follow the list to shop. She did not allow Lu San to interfere in any way with the children's affairs. Fong Nuo and her daughter took Lucy for a walk. Lu San had wanted to join them to get some fresh air, but Fong Nuo refused. She wanted to touch the child's face but was again refused by Fong Nuo's mother, who looked at her with disdain. Lu San felt very unhappy that she could only work and not get close to her granddaughter. Wasn't this just making her a free babysitter? She felt very unfair but had no choice but to go back to the kitchen to continue working. Seeing that the milk-inducing soup Fong Nuo's mother was stewing had run out of water, she thought to add a bowl of water. But Lu San thought of what had happened earlier and angrily poured the water out. It wasn't until Fong Nuo's mother came into the kitchen that she realized the pot had burned. Lu San gloated, saying that old people were easily forgetful. When she saw Fong Nuo's mother's expression, she felt much better. The mundane, comforting days passed by in just a few days, until one day, Xiao Lu's younger brother, Xiao Su, came over, and the tensions between the two families erupted again. As soon as Xiao Su entered the house and saw the table full of food, he immediately began to eat greedily without caring about his appearance. Fong Nuo's mother saw this and casually said, "You can come over to eat anytime." She was just being polite, but Xiao Su didn't pick up on it. This made her very angry, and she could only mutter to her daughter behind her back. She shouldn't have said that extra sentence. She would have to tell Xiao Lu to talk to him later. That evening, Xiao Lu returned home and went to his mother's room to urge her to send his younger brother home. Lu San refused outright, arguing that since Fong Nuo's mother had agreed, as the older brother, he shouldn't be so petty. With no other option, Xiao Lu could only remind his mother to tell his younger brother to watch his words and not speak recklessly in front of elders. But the next morning, Xiao Su caused trouble again. Fong Nuo's mother saw him smoking in the bathroom and was furious. Lu San came out and scolded his son, apologizing and promising it wouldn't happen again. But Xiao Su didn't seem to care. Back in his mother's room, Lu San urged him to behave himself and sternly warned him not to smoke. Xiao Su retorted, "You're just a coward, big brother." Lu San told his son not to stir up trouble and to come eat if he wanted to. Xiao Su agreed on the surface but didn't take it seriously. Not only did he smoke recklessly in his room, but he also accidentally burned a hole in the curtains. Today, Fong Nuo's mother was cleaning and took down the curtains, only to discover the hole. She suppressed her anger and went to Lu San's room to confront him. Lu San insisted he hadn't smoked. She felt wronged and told her son to apologize to Fong Nuo. Xiao Su angrily asked why he should apologize. This was overheard by Fong Nuo's mother. Lu San, seeing her angry expression, quickly said that Xiao Su had accidentally damaged the curtains. Fong Nuo's mother scolded Lu San for his poor parenting. Xiao Su couldn't stand seeing his mother being scolded by others. Fong Nuo's mother, furious, laughed sarcastically and said that this was Xiao Lu's home and outsiders shouldn't meddle. Xiao Su said, "I feel so wronged by my brother and my mother. Every day we have to live our lives looking at your faces. I don't think this is their home. It's your home." Fong Nuo, hearing the commotion, angrily scolded Xiao Su and her mother to speak politely. Just as the argument was heating up, Xiao Lu returned. Seeing them fight, he was completely confused. Even though he was frustrated and helpless, he forced a smile and tried to calm everyone down. After Xiao Lu understood the situation, he thought it was just a trivial matter. They were all family. There was no need to ruin the harmony. They should all understand each other. However, Fong Nuo was extremely angry. Xiao Su was dissatisfied with his sister-in-law's actions and defended his brother. He believed that marrying a wife was to serve her husband and mother-in-law. Fong Nuo's mother scolded Xiao Su, saying that as a man, he only knew how to spend his parents' money. What right did he have to criticize others? He was freeloading and yet felt superior. At this point, Lu San could no longer bear to listen. This was her son, and she had the right to raise him however she wanted. The two sides continued to argue back and forth. The entire house was in complete chaos. Xiao Lu, who had been standing by, finally broke down and slapped herself, saying it was her fault. She shouldn't have brought the two sides together. Since having children, she hadn't had a single day of peace. She worked tirelessly during the day and came home at night, only to be met with complaints from one side and insults from the other. Now both of them were unhappy, and she had to comfort both of them. After listening to her husband vent his pent-up feelings, Fong Nuo finally realized that she had focused all her energy on her daughter and neglected her husband's feelings. She knelt down beside her husband and apologized. After this big fight, the mother-in-law chose to step back. Before long, Lucy was already 1 year old. Life didn't stop changing just because the child had grown up. It remained the same as before. Xiao Lu also gradually grew tired of his wife's complaints and the children's crying at night. Every time he received a call and heard the children crying, he chose to avoid it. He drove away directly and immediately made plans with a female client. Since the big argument at home, Xiao Lu's workload had tripled. He would rather be outside than return home. The time he spent with clients far exceeded the time he spent at home. On the female client's birthday, he specially prepared a gift for her. The two of them climbed over the fence just to eat a pancake, as intimate as a couple in love. On Fong Nuo's side, however, things were completely different. The two of them had to take turns taking care of the child and barely spoke to each other on a regular basis. Even when they went to work together, there was no communication between them. Over time, their relationship no longer resembled that of a married couple but more like that of two roommates. Fong Nuo knew that there was a problem in their relationship, so she went to the market to carefully select ingredients to have a nice dinner with Xiao Lu and strengthen their bond. Little did she know that her husband called to say he wouldn't be coming home that night. Fong Nuo was deeply disappointed. By 4 a.m., Xiao Lu still hadn't returned home. She tried to comfort the crying child but eventually broke down in tears. Meanwhile, Xiao Lu was discussing work with the female client, and their conversation had escalated to the point where they were in bed together. It wasn't until the next morning when Fong Nuo went to work that she finally managed to get through to Xiao Lu. Xiao Lu immediately explained that he had gotten drunk the previous night and was taken to the office by a colleague. Although Fong Nuo was upset that her husband hadn't come home all night, she didn't suspect anything. At that moment, Xiao Lu was also terrified and didn't know how to face what had happened. That night, it was pouring rain outside, but Xiao Lu still didn't come home. Unexpectedly, the child developed a high fever. Fong Nuo hurriedly called Xiao Lu but couldn't get through. At that moment, Xiao Lu was at the female client's house, wanting to end things. However, Julie was deeply in love with Xiao Lu and didn't want to leave. She even took out the photos they had taken together yesterday to threaten him. But Xiao Lu had never thought of divorcing her. He apologized to Julie and said they shouldn't contact each other anymore. Fong Nuo, unable to wait for her husband's arrival, grew increasingly anxious and had no choice but to call their mutual friend Xiahua to ask him to contact Xiao Lu while she and her mother took a taxi to the hospital with the child. However, the rain was too heavy to hail a taxi, and her mother even slipped and fell. Fortunately, Xiahua, who had heard the news, arrived and took the three of them, soaking wet, to the hospital. When Xiao Lu received the call, he ignored Julie, who was still threatening him, and left immediately for the hospital. By the time he arrived at the hospital, all the procedures had already been completed. Fong Nuo was very upset with Xiao Lu for being late, and the two had a heated argument. Unable to bear it anymore, Xiahua intervened and reminded Xiao Lu to watch his words. It turned out that the night before, Xiahua had seen Xiao Lu hugging and kissing a female client. Xiao Lu felt he was in the wrong but couldn't help arguing with Xiahua out of pride. The two nearly came to blows at the hospital. After calming down at home, Fong Nuo took the initiative to apologize to Xiao Lu. Xiao Lu decided to cut off all contact with Julie. He handed over his work to a colleague and deleted Julie's contact information. Julie returned home and was harshly scolded by her mother. "I've provided you with the best education since you were a child. Look at what you've learned. You're destroying someone else's family." For a family that values face more than life itself, a mother absolutely cannot allow her daughter to get entangled with a married man and destroy someone else's family. Even everyone in the company knows about it, and she's brought shame upon the family. But Julie showed no remorse and even defended herself. The mother and daughter had a huge argument and completely broke off all contact. The pitiful and helpless Julie tried to seek comfort from Xiaolu but found that he wasn't answering his phone. With no one to turn to, she went to Xiaolu's daughter's first birthday party to demand an explanation. Seeing the happy family on stage, Julie cried bitterly. When Xiaolu took the stage to speak and saw Julie sitting below, he panicked. Under the applause of relatives and friends, Xiaolu and Feng Nuo embraced each other, which tore Julie's heart apart. Xiaolu pleaded with Julie to leave. Julie refused to leave and demanded that Xiaolu give her an explanation immediately. Their argument disturbed Feng Nuo, who was eating. Xiaolu hurriedly explained that it was a new client from the company. Julie immediately retorted, "What happened between us is none of your business." Feng Nuo realized something and told Julie to discuss it another day. Today was her daughter's first birthday banquet, but Julie had no intention of letting it go. "Xiaolu, I broke ties with my mother for you, and everyone at the company is talking behind my back. Now I'm a laughingstock. And you just turned around and deleted my WeChat." Julie even pulled out their intimate photos to show Feng Nuo. At that moment, Feng Nuo's heart broke, but she didn't make a scene in front of her relatives and friends. She turned to her mother and said she would stay at home tonight, then left the banquet holding her daughter. Knowing she had made a huge mistake, Xiaolu waited outside her mother-in-law's building all night. Feng Nuo knew that avoiding her wasn't a solution, so she called Xiaolu home and confronted him, asking if he hadn't replied to her WeChat or answered her calls for the past 6 months because he was with her. Xiaolu explained that they had been discussing work the whole time. Feng Nuo asked if discussing work with female clients in bed was also company policy. Xiaolu said he had cut off contact with Julie, and begged Feng Nuo to give him a chance to redeem himself. But Feng Nuo felt that her repeated tolerance had only been met with her husband's betrayal, and it was too late now. Now her parents knew, and even their relatives and friends knew. "Our marriage is in trouble." She then pushed Xiaolu out of the room. Xiaolu returned home and was immediately scolded by his mother. Lu San demanded that Xiaolu go to Feng Nuo's house the next day to apologize. The next day, Lu San brought Xiaolu to Feng Nuo's house. She said she hadn't raised Xiaolu properly. Xiaolu also sincerely apologized to his in-laws. The father-in-law felt that Xiaolu had disappointed them greatly. They had come to apologize, but Lu San and Feng Nuo's mother started arguing again. Feng Nuo told them to go home first and that she needed time to think. After all, they had been together for so many years. For Lucy's sake, Feng Nuo ultimately decided to confront Xiaolu face-to-face and forgive him. But as soon as Feng Nuo entered the building, she heard Julie calling Xiaolu. Hearing Julie's pitiful voice on the other end, Xiaolu softened and agreed to meet her. Julie said she had come to terms with it and would never disturb their lives again, wishing them happiness. But just as the two were about to turn and leave, they saw Feng Nuo not far away. The reunion between her husband and her lover finally broke Feng Nuo's heart completely. Xiaolu hurriedly chased after her and grabbed Feng Nuo. Feng Nuo slapped him hard across the face. She had forgiven him time and time again, only to be hurt by Xiaolu over and over again. Recalling everything Xiaolu had done to her in the past, it all flashed before her eyes. Giving birth alone in the hospital, thirsty in the middle of the night with no one to bring her water. Every day, she took care of the child alone, and when her husband came home in the middle of the night, he was drunk. The way he looked down on her after she had given birth and was incontinent. All these memories were vividly etched in her mind. This was all evidence that he didn't love her. Feng Nuo finally came to her senses. Their marriage was doomed. Upon returning home, Feng Nuo could no longer bear it and locked herself in her room, crying all night. Xiaolu still wanted to save the marriage, so he asked his mother to help persuade Feng Nuo. Lu San remained silent, quietly pickling Feng Nuo's favorite dish. After finishing, she brought it to Feng Nuo. Feng Nuo thought her mother-in-law had come to persuade her. Lu San said she had come to say goodbye to Lucy. After all, they had been mother-in-law and daughter-in-law. Fan Nua looked at her tearful mother-in-law and felt reluctant to part, but fate had run its course. Fan Nua made up her mind and sent Xiaolu a message that night. The next day, Fan Nua put on light makeup before leaving home. Her father had bought some small lobsters early in the morning. Seeing her hesitate, he said to his daughter, "Just think it through. Aren't you the one who loves the flavor of the lobsters I cook? You can always come home and eat them whenever you want." The two arrived at the Civil Affairs Bureau as planned. Xiao Lu wanted Fang Nua to reconsider. He promised not to work overtime, drink alcohol, or do anything that might cause Fang Nua to misunderstand him. Fang Nua didn't hesitate and signed the papers. The two successfully completed the divorce proceedings. Even though they were reluctant to let go of this marriage, it had come to an end. After the divorce, the two sat down to discuss the division of their assets. Fang Nua took out a notebook and calculated that their savings totaled over 70,000 yuan. In theory, it should be split evenly, but Fang Nua started calculating the family's debts. She said that Xiao Su had taken over 20,000 yuan in 9 installments and hadn't paid any of it back. Xiao Lu wasn't happy with that. "If we're going to calculate, let's do it properly. Last year, when your parents went on a trip, I paid for the plane tickets and accommodation. I also gave them 30,000 yuan." Before Fang Nua could respond, Xiao Lu continued, "During holidays and birthdays, I gave my mother 800 yuan, but I gave your parents 1,000 yuan. Seeing Xiao Lu's unreasonable behavior, Fang Nua was so angry that she felt a sharp pain in her chest. When they first got married, her parents contributed 30,000 yuan toward the house renovation. Moreover, most of the expenses over the past year had been covered by her parents. Xiao Lu was extremely dissatisfied and became increasingly unreasonable. He then brought up the incident where Fang Nua had pulled down his pants in the hospital. Indeed, those who know you best can hurt you the most. This was the one thing Fang Nua couldn't face. Enraged, Fang Nua also began attacking Xiao Lu. The two argued more and more fiercely, disregarding their past feelings. They say that when people tear off their masks, they say whatever comes to mind. The once loving couple was now completely estranged. In the end, they parted ways in anger. Fang Nua, unwilling to accept this, decided to organize a divorce banquet. She invited all the friends who had witnessed their love and also called Julie. She intended to publicly sever ties with Xiao Lu and formally notify him not to appear in her life anymore. The child would also never see him again, and Lucy would change her name to have no connection with him. She would also ensure the child never knew there was a father named Xiao Lu. Xiao Lu firmly refused, stating that whether he could see Lucy was up to the law. Fang Nua accused him of having no right to see the child. She then raised her glass and thanked Julie for helping her see the true nature of marriage. She said she had come to see the ugly true face of this person. "From now on, you and Xiao Lu can be together openly without hiding anything." Julie was also furious. She said their marriage had always had problems. Fang Nua said, "Whether my marriage has problems or not is none of your business. You caused a scene at my child's first birthday party, and I'll remember this for the rest of my life." Just as she finished speaking, Julie's mother arrived at the scene. She apologized to Fang Nua on her daughter's behalf and bowed deeply. Then she walked over to Xiao Lu and warned him to stay away from Julie in the future. At that moment, Fang Nua also said the same words, "Stay away from my daughter." From then on, the two became strangers. Xiao Lu never saw the child again. Life after the divorce was incredibly easy. Before long, Lucy was already 4 years old. The entire family showered all their love on Lucy. Watching Lucy grow up day by day, Fang Nua felt that everything was worth it. When Lucy saw other children happily calling their fathers, she felt incredibly envious. She couldn't help but follow suit and call out dad as well. Fang Nua froze upon hearing this, his heart aching at the sight of his daughter's longing gaze. Children are often the ones who suffer the most when their parents divorce. Since Fang Nua's divorce, the entire family had showered all their love on their daughter. They hoped Lucy would have a happy childhood. However, they had overlooked the fact that despite receiving everyone's love, Lucy was missing the role of a father. 3 years ago, after Fang Nua and Xiao Lu divorced, Lucy never saw her father again. Missing her daughter, Xiao Lu could only secretly send her gifts. Over the past 3 years, Xia Hua had been taking care of the mother and daughter. They were university classmates, and Xia Hua had always liked her. That day, Xia Hua invited Fong Nua to play ball. Little did she know that Fong Nua accidentally fell. Xia Hua wiped Fong Nua's wound with a towel, seeing the love and care he showed her. Fong Nua nervously avoided Xia Hua's kindness. Xia Hua didn't want to continue in silence. On the bus, he finally gathered his courage and confessed his feelings to Fong Nua, hoping she would give him a chance. Fong Nua kept her head down and said nothing. When Fong Nua's parents found out that Xia Hua had confessed his feelings to him, they invited Xia Hua to their home the next day, hoping to bring the two together. Before leaving, Fong Nua's mother asked him to see Xia Hua off. The two walked one in front of the other, but Xia Hua suddenly stopped. He mustered his courage once again and confessed his feelings to Fong Nua. Fong Nua never expected such a kind-hearted person to speak so firmly. She didn't know how to face Xia Hua. The next day, Fong Nua brought Lucy to Xia Hua's shop. Watching her daughter interact with Xia Hua, she recalled the scene at the amusement park where Lucy had called someone else daddy. Perhaps it was time to let go of the past. She decided to take the plunge. The next day, Fong Nua decided to ask Xia Hua out. She got straight to the point, telling him she was a divorced woman with a child and that he needed to think it through. Xia Hua promised he would be a responsible and loving father. Thus, the two officially started their relationship. Xia Hua not only doted on Fong Nua but also treated the child as his own. To Fong Nua, Xia Hua was the best gift heaven had ever given her. She believed everything would unfold as she had always dreamed. However, on that day, Lucy suddenly fainted and was rushed to the hospital. She was diagnosed with acute lymphoblastic leukemia. To cure it completely, a bone marrow transplant must be performed as soon as possible. Fong Nua and Xia Hua immediately went for a bone marrow match. She regarded Lucy as her own life and felt as if the sky had fallen. The pain from chemotherapy tormented Lucy, causing her to vomit constantly and turn pale. At such a young age, she was enduring suffering that even adults would find unbearable. Fong Nua watched her daughter and shed tears. Lei Wen was worried that Fong Nua couldn't handle it and asked her and Xia Hua to go home and rest for the night while he stayed behind to take care of Lucy. Back home, Xia Hua comforted Fong Nua, assuring her that Lucy would definitely recover. Fong Nua knew that curing her daughter would require a huge sum of money. Therefore, she didn't want to burden him and proposed divorce. Xia Hua firmly refused. Although Lucy was the daughter of Fong Nua and Xiaolu, he had always treated her as his own flesh and blood. He was willing to face all difficulties alongside Fong Nua. The next morning, during breakfast, the family was still unaware of Lucy's diagnosis of leukemia. Fong Nua's father-in-law and mother-in-law praised Lucy for being well-behaved and understanding. The entire family argued over who would go to the hospital to care for Lucy. Fong Nua couldn't help but tear up and run away. It was then that they realized Lucy didn't have a cold. Everyone came to visit, but Lu San couldn't help but burst into tears. Afterward, Fong Nua returned to her parents' home. Her parents learned that her mother-in-law was willing to support Lucy's treatment. They should go to the hospital more often to take care of the child. It was already generous of them to agree to treat Lucy. After all, she wasn't their biological granddaughter. Fong Nua should feel free to ask them for help in the future. If the sky were to fall, her parents would be there to support her. Fong Nua couldn't help but cry again. She felt that her parents were still burdening them at their age. However, treating leukemia required finding a suitable bone marrow donor. The medical expenses alone were beyond what an ordinary family could afford. Although Xia Hua's parents were willing to give everything they had to save Lucy, his sister, Xia Dan, was worried that they would lose both their money and Lucy. Xia Hua said he still had some savings and would figure out the rest later. Xia Dan was unhappy upon hearing this. She could tell her brother was planning to sell the store and the house to pay for Lucy's treatment. Xia Hua knew his sister was worried about him, but ever since he married Fong Nua, he had regarded Lucy as his own flesh and blood. One really couldn't be too selfish in life. Why was his sister so heartless? Xia Hua told his sister that in his eyes, Lucy was his own child. Xia Dan cut off her precious hair. After chemotherapy, her hair had fallen out in clumps. To spare Xia Dan's feelings, her stepfather helped her cut it off while pretending to play a game. Despite her mother's constant comfort, when the razor blade sliced through Xia Dan's hair, she couldn't hold back her tears. But with her father by her side, she forced herself to stay strong. Xia Hua put the hair tie that symbolized good luck from Lucy's hair on his wrist. Unfortunately, The results of the two's bone marrow matches were unsuccessful. The doctor told them to either wait for news from the bone marrow bank or mobilize their own relatives and friends to donate. After all, one more person meant one more hope. Fang Nua hurriedly notified her parents to come for a bone marrow match, but it was also unsuccessful. She then asked Xiao Su to notify Xiao Lu to go to the hospital for a bone marrow match. Upon learning that Lucy had leukemia, Xiao Su finally acted responsibly. He wanted to be a match after all. He was Lucy's uncle. After the test, Xiao Su went to the ward. It was his first time meeting Lucy. Lucy didn't shy away and hugged him immediately. Xiao Su couldn't help but touch Lucy's head. Looking at Lucy, Xiao Su's eyes welled up with tears. Before leaving, he didn't forget to tell her to contact him if she needed anything. At this moment, Xiao Lu was completely unaware of what had happened. He had just remarried, and his new wife, Du Fei, was a gentle and considerate girl. Xiao Lu was no longer like he was in his first marriage, where he only knew how to work. He doted on his current wife. The two lived a very sweet life. Xiao Lu and Fang Nua could have been happy on their own. Who would have thought that because of their daughter's illness, their lives would intersect again? When Xiao Lu arrived at the hospital, the two immediately started arguing. He felt that as the biological father, he should have been notified first and was very upset. Fang Nua believed he was unworthy of being Lucy's father. You should just focus on being a good stepfather to the child. I didn't bring you back to be her father. Do you understand? The argument grew more intense. At that moment, Xia Hua heard their argument. Angrily, he scolded them for arguing about right and wrong at such a critical moment. The most urgent matter now was to take care of Lucy's illness. When they returned to the ward, Lucy had already woken up. Seeing Uncle Xiao, who often took her to the amusement park, Lucy hoped to be held by him as before. Xiao Lu felt very upset but could only comfort Lucy and promise to take her there once she recovered. Holding his daughter, Xiao Lu couldn't help but cry. He never expected that in just a few days, Lucy had been so severely tormented by her illness. He couldn't understand why Lucy had fallen ill like this. After Xiao Lu left, Xia Hua washed the clothes and advised Fang Nua to put aside their past grievances for now. The most important thing was for everyone to do their best to save Lucy. Fang Nua was torn because Xiao Lu had the highest chance of being a suitable donor. After returning home, Xiao Lu took out all the red envelopes from the box. These were the red envelopes he had prepared for his daughter's birthday but had never had the chance to give her. He knew it was useless to ask Fang Nua, so he decided to give the money to Xia Hua. When Xiao Lu said he would take on the cost of Lucy's treatment, Xia Hua refused. Fang Nua is my wife, and Lucy is my child. Taking care of both of them is my responsibility. Take the money back. I promise I'll ask you for it if I ever need it. Seeing Xia Hua's firm refusal, Xiao Lu took back the card and insisted that Xia Hua keep the cash. He said this was his way of making up for all the years he had failed Lucy as a father. Xia Hua eventually accepted the cash. Back in the ward, he handed the cash to Fang Nua, saying it was from Xiao Lu. Fang Nua knew this was a time when money was needed, so she accepted it. Besides, life is unpredictable, and people's hearts can change. For Lucy's sake, why dwell on past grievances? Everything seemed insignificant now. Moreover, every time Xiao Lu came, Lucy seemed very happy. She thought that having one more person love Lucy wasn't a bad thing, so she no longer stopped Xiao Lu from visiting Lucy. However, after waiting anxiously, Xiao Lu's bone marrow match failed, and everyone lost hope. Seeing the patients recover and leave the hospital, they felt a mix of emotions. They could only pin their hopes on news from the bone marrow bank. Fortunately, the Chinese bone marrow bank found a suitable bone marrow match for Lucy. Upon hearing the news, Fang Nua burst into tears and hurriedly called everyone to share the good news. That evening, the four gathered together to celebrate joyfully. Since Fang Nua and Xiao Lu divorced, they hadn't been together. Now that Lucy had a chance to survive, it was good news for everyone. However, fate played another cruel joke on them. The doctor told them that the bone marrow donor had withdrawn. This plunged Fang Nua, who had just seen a glimmer of hope, back into despair. But she refused to give up this opportunity. To obtain the donor's contact information, Fang Nua pleaded with the doctor to give her the donor's contact information so she could go in person to beg for help. However, the donor's information was confidential. The doctor said there was nothing he could do and told them to keep waiting for news from the bone marrow bank. Seeing her daughter's condition worsening, Fong Nua felt heartbroken. She didn't know if she could wait for the next donor. She couldn't give up. So the three of them decided to go to the Chinese bone marrow bank. But this wasn't a place anyone could just walk into. Fong Nua pleaded repeatedly. After all, people are only human. Eventually, the security guard opened the door. Fong Nua begged Director Wen to give her the donor's information. But Director Wen had seen this situation many times before and knew what the donor meant to the patient's family. However, the rules clearly stated that no information related to the donation could be disclosed. They could only tell them to wait a little longer. With her child's life at stake, Fong Nua became unreasonable. Director Wen refused outright, leaving no room for negotiation. The three could only leave in disappointment. It's heartbreaking to see parents so desperate no one wants to give up their last hope. They waited until Director Wen finished work. Then Fong Nua and Lei Wen quietly followed him home. But Director Wen refused to open the door. So Fong Nua could only keep pleading at the door. Director Wen, my child is better. I'll bring her to see you. Moved by compassion, the director finally opened the door and explained the situation. As a mother, Fong Nua finally understood. However, what made her even more anxious was the news from the hospital that the child's condition had worsened. Fong Nua rushed to the hospital without delay. Upon learning that her daughter was out of danger, she finally breathed a sigh of relief. But she knew that her child didn't have much time left. She dared not relax for even a second and could only seek help from the doctor again. The doctor told them that there was actually one more option. If the child's biological parents had another child, there would be a 50% chance of success. However, Fong Nua and Xiao Lu had already divorced and both had started new families. Having another child was no easy task. To save her daughter with leukemia, Xiao Lu confessed his plan to his current wife. He intended to have another child with his ex-wife and use the umbilical cord blood from the second child to save Lucy. Which wife would accept her husband having a child with another woman? Xiao Lu even brazenly claimed that if they didn't do this, Lucy would have no chance of survival. Du Fei didn't give him any room to negotiate and refused angrily. Meanwhile, Fong Nua and Xiahua went to the playground where they used to go to school together. This place was filled with their happy memories. Fong Nua felt guilty towards Xiahua. Xiahua had done so much for her and their daughter, yet she had dragged her entire family into this mess. She decided to divorce Xiahua. To save Lucy, there was no other option. Xiahua remained silent after hearing this and turned to leave. Later, Xiahua called Xiao Lu out. He told him that Fong Nua wanted to divorce him and asked him what he planned to do. Xiao Lu explained that they only wanted a child to save Lucy and hadn't considered divorce. At that moment, Fong Nua arrived and couldn't pull the angry two apart. They started fighting. Just then, Fong Nua received a call from her mother, and the three rushed to the hospital. Malignant cells had invaded Lucy's bone marrow, causing her bones to ache. The young Lucy, enduring immense pain, kept begging her parents to take her home. She promised to go home, behave, and not eat ice cream or chocolate anymore. Everyone felt as though their hearts had been pierced by a thorn. After Lucy fell asleep, the three went downstairs. The two, having calmed down, apologized to each other. They felt that they all wanted to save Lucy, and at such a critical moment, they couldn't afford to panic. After a night had passed, Du Fei suddenly proposed divorce. She knew Xiao Lu would save Lucy and would have another child with Fong Nua. She couldn't accept it, and it wasn't fair to anyone. Rather than let so many people suffer, she chose to step back. Compared to Du Fei's rationality, Xiahua seemed very humble. He could accept Fong Nua and Xiao Lu having another child. If you have another child, it will be my child too. As long as we're together, I can face anything with you. Xiahua had given Fong Nua and Lucy all his love without reservation. This made Fong Nua feel even more guilty. To save Lucy as soon as possible, Fong Nua and Xiao Lu had prepared all the necessary paperwork to go to the hospital for artificial insemination. After an examination, the doctor informed them that Fong Nua was temporarily unsuitable for IVF surgery. This left the two of them in a dilemma. However, the child's condition was deteriorating rapidly. Fong Nua couldn't just stand by and watch the child die. After a painful decision, she finally sent a message to Xiao Lu. The two of them agreed to meet at a hotel, but when they sat together, they felt awkward and didn't know what to do. But at this point, there was no other choice. Du Fei found out about the two going to the hotel and went to find Xiahua. Xiahua remained indifferent and refused to let Du Fei in. Du Fei, emotionally overwhelmed, banged on the roller door. On the other side of the door, Xiahua felt heartbroken but could only cry with her head in her hands. Meanwhile, Fang Nuo and Xiao Lu sat there feeling like strangers. Taking that step was extremely difficult for both of them, so Xiao Lu took the initiative and said, "Let's just forget about it." With their hearts heavy, the two went home separately. It was through this incident that they came to understand how important trust is. Fang Nuo then sent a message to Xiahua to confess the truth. She thought she could sacrifice everything for her daughter, but she realized she couldn't, because she couldn't bear to leave Xiahua. When Xiahua saw Fang Nuo say she couldn't leave him, he was overjoyed like a child. Fang Nuo felt a sense of relief. However, what happened next put Fang Nuo in a difficult situation. She discovered she was pregnant. This should have been a joyful occasion, but her heart was heavy. If she kept the child, her daughter, who had leukemia, would have no hope. If she didn't keep the child, she felt she would be betraying Xiahua, so Fang Nuo ultimately kept it a secret and didn't tell anyone. But unfortunately, Xiahua discovered it in the bathroom. Upon learning that Fang Nuo was pregnant, Xiahua was overjoyed, but he pretended not to know, because he wanted Fang Nuo to tell him the good news herself. But no matter how Xiahua hinted at it, Fang Nuo never told him about her pregnancy. But there are no secrets that last forever. Soon, Xie Dan found out about Fang Nuo and Xiao Lu's affair and scolded her for being shameless. Fang Nuo confessed that she had indeed considered it and sincerely apologized to her family. At that moment, Xiahua returned and confessed that he had agreed to let them do it. Xie Dan berated her brother for not being a man. Her parents, however, remained silent. Xie Dan made a vow that as long as she was still in this family, she would never allow Fang Nuo to have a child with anyone else. A few days passed, and seeing that her sister was still angry, Xiahua finally revealed the news of Fang Nuo's pregnancy. Upon hearing this, Xie Dan excitedly told her parents. The next day, Xie Dan and her mother prepared a soup and went to the hospital to try to convince Xiahua to keep the child. "My mother has spent her entire life savings on Lucy's treatment. As long as you are still Xiahua's wife, you must give birth to this child." Fang Nuo's mother said that this matter was up to her daughter. "You care about this and that, but who has ever cared about my daughter? From today onward, my daughter can do as she pleases." Xiahua told his mother and sister that he also wanted to keep the child. Xie Dan told Xiahua to call Fang Nuo over so she could apologize to her properly. After Fang Nuo arrived, Xie Dan knelt down and begged her to keep the child, but Fang Nuo turned away helplessly and left. Xiahua and his sister embraced each other and wept. It was precisely because of Fang Nuo's heartless departure that Xiahua, in a fit of anger, reported Fang Nuo and Xiao Lu to the hospital as a fake couple. Once the hospital discovered that their marriage certificate was fake, they would be unable to undergo IVF. The next day, Xiao Lu received a call from the hospital about the report. The doctor stated that they were not a real couple, and IVF was illegal. Therefore, their surgery was cancelled by the hospital. Xiao Lu was shocked and immediately called Fang Nuo to tell her about it. She urged her to let go of the past since the surgery was impossible. She should focus on taking care of her health and give birth to Xiahua's child smoothly. Lucy would definitely find a suitable match someday. Fang Nuo leaned against the staircase door to take the call, furious about who had reported them. Suddenly, someone pushed the door from behind, causing her to fall heavily to the ground and suffer a miscarriage. Those unaware of the situation would certainly assume it was intentional. Fortunately, Xiao Lu revealed the truth to Xiahua. Xiahua was speechless. He never imagined that his own report had led to Fang Nuo's miscarriage. However, fortunately, the in-laws did not blame Fang Nuo. Her father-in-law even kindly made her some chicken soup to help her recover. Even the usually sharp-tongued Xie Dan expressed sympathy. The understanding of her in-laws deeply moved Fang Nuo. Meanwhile, Xiahua didn't know how to face her, so he made an excuse and ran out. Fang Nuo thought Xiahua still didn't believe her and felt deeply disappointed. She followed Xiahua out and saw him crying uncontrollably outside the door. Xiahua cried as he apologized to Fang Nuo. Hearing this, Fang Nuo couldn't believe that the kind-hearted Xiahua would do such a thing. Looking back, she realized that everyone is selfish, and she was no exception. When she married Xiahua, she didn't love him. Both had made mistakes, but they had moved on, so she didn't blame Xiahua. In the past, she had been so stubborn and unwilling to give in. Since meeting Xiahua, She had become softer, and Xia Hua had given her the strongest support. Feng Nuo forgave Xia Hua, and the two embraced tightly. After this incident, they were certain that their future would only get better. However, Lucy's condition suddenly worsened in the hospital, and blood was gushing from her nose. The doctors rushed Lucy into the operating room for emergency surgery. Feng Nuo leaned despairingly against the operating room door. She had never imagined death could be so close, and she was terrified of losing her daughter. Fortunately, Lucy was saved this time, and everyone sighed in relief. However, they were plunged into panic once again. The doctors told them that if they couldn't find a suitable donor in time, they didn't know if Lucy would survive the next surgery. Moreover, Lucy's chemotherapy had increased to 3 times a week, facing the high medical expenses in the later stages. Xia Hua returned home to take out the property deed to sell the house. Xia Dan snatched the deed from her brother and urged him to think it through. However, Xia Hua was determined to sell the house. Although Xia Dan was usually strict, she had a kind heart. She took out her savings and combined them with her parents' retirement money to give to Feng Nuo for a child with no blood relation. Their family had done everything they could. Feng Nuo's parents also took out the insurance they had purchased earlier and planned to sell it to cover Lucy's medical expenses. He also instructed his wife to take good care of herself and not get seriously ill, so as not to cause trouble for Feng Nuo. He then gave all his savings to Xia Hua. The entire family united to save Lucy. However, even if they managed to raise enough money, Lucy would still face death if a suitable bone marrow donor wasn't found in time. Lucy seemed to sense the unusual atmosphere. She told Uncle Xiao that every time someone died on Earth, a star would appear in the sky. "I become a star in the sky. If you miss me, just look up at the sky," she said. Lucy's words broke Xiao Lu's heart, so he gathered everyone at Lei Wen's bar. Xiao Lu knelt on the ground and begged everyone to let him and his ex-wife have another child. He also thanked everyone for their efforts for the child. Xiao Lu blamed himself for the current situation, saying it was all because of the mistakes he made years ago. His former boss, who witnessed this scene, felt a mix of emotions, because he now matched Lucy's bone marrow type. He also suspected that Xiao Lu had left the company, leading to its bankruptcy. Moved by the scene, Feng Nuo's resentment toward him faded. Back at the hospital, Feng Nuo admired Xiao Lu's courage and admitted that she had been unreasonable in the past. She had once planned to never see him again for the rest of her life. Now she realized that not letting her father see the child was wrong, and she apologized sincerely to Xiao Lu. The future is long, and she hopes they can witness their child's future together. The next day, the boss came to the hospital and asked the doctor to proceed with the process. He then went to the ward to visit Lucy, and the two shook hands and exchanged secrets. Lucy said that she actually has 2 fathers. She knows that Uncle Xiao is also her father. She also knows that some children who fall asleep never wake up again. The boss hurriedly said that those sleeping children might be in another world, but she didn't understand why adults who claimed to love her kept lying to her. Didn't telling her the truth mean she wouldn't die? Her mother said she was the bravest child and would get better, but her mother was always crying. Was it because she wouldn't get better? There were also many strangers who came to see her. After kissing her, they would wipe her with alcohol, and after hugging her, they would disinfect themselves. Was her body that dirty? Why hadn't anyone told her what illness she had? She doesn't want to get injections or take medicine. It hurts so much. She doesn't understand why everyone wants her to live like this. Her mother must love her. Uncle Xiao also said he loves her, but she doesn't understand why her mother always gets angry with Uncle Xiao. And her father said he loves her very much, but after the little brother was born, why did he suddenly become unhappy when he looked at her? Since that day, her grandmother and aunt, who rarely came to the hospital, also came. She saw them so happy for the first time. Isn't she getting better? That night, her father talked to her a lot. He clearly knew that reporting him would mean his death, but why did she feel even sadder than him when she saw him crying? And Uncle Xiao was also her father. Why did he leave her? Why didn't he stay by her side? Lucy could see all the entanglements between adults clearly. Su Wei was also moved by the little girl in front of him. He told Lucy that he could have saved someone's life, but at the time, he was too selfish to go. However, now that he was older and wiser, he had decided to save that person's life. Lucy asked him if it was still in time. Su Wei choked up and said, "Of course." Lucy didn't know that the uncle in front of her was going to save her. That night, Lucy discussed the topic of death with her older brother Tom. Despite their young age, they weren't afraid of death, but they were afraid that their mother would be sad if they died. They would also be sad if they couldn't see their mother anymore. Tom told her that stars were in the sky, and she could see her parents there. Lucy didn't understand how her parents could find her among all the stars in the sky. A few days later, Lucy welcomed the dawn. For Fong Nuo, it was like the day she gave birth to Lucy 6 years ago. She murmured to herself, "Birth is the beginning of a new life for a child. My dear child, welcome to this world." The story ends here. This drama is actually a true reflection of many women's lives after marriage.